right, welcome back, everyone. Yeah, good to see y'all here again. Just got to the hotel here in Texas and broadcasting live now from San Antonio. Sorry, let me pull up the questions here. All right, yeah, good to see y'all. Yeah, just reading your comments down on the lower right here, so you see me reading them. Hey, Lizzie, good to see you. Yeah, good to see y'all. All right, folks, again, as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. I'll try to get to them. I will start off with a few news topics, though. So first off, there's an update with Trump. Let me go over this. Now, this is Epoch Times, first of all. It says Trump, first article here says Trump RNC, Republican National Committee, raised $86 million online for efforts to investigate election integrity, suggesting that both the Republican Party and Trump are going to continue these investigations into what happened here with the elections. Now, let's go into this a bit. Yeah, good to see y'all here. All right, it says here, former President Donald Trump and the Republican National Committee in the last 37 days of 2020 raised $86 million online, according to a January 29 filing with the Federal Election Commission. The president's legal team at the time was seeking support for the campaign's efforts to investigate the integrity of the 2020 presidential election. It says the amount raised was in addition to the $207.5 million that was raised by Trump Make America Great Again committee in the 19 days after Election Day, according to Bloomberg. Now, it says that figure does not include all contributions made to various Trump committees or the RNC. The Trump Make America Great Again Committee is a joint fundraising committee for small dollar donors, to donate to the Trump campaign, the RNC, and from November 18th, the Save America PAC, which is the new slogan of the Trump movement, Save America. And the Save America PAC is a political action committee that was set up to fund Trump's post-presidency activities. Now, it says here, most of the money raised since November 24th, $68 million, was via WinRed, a Republican online contribution platform. Yeah. Well, I won't go too deep into this. Just goes into some of what the money's being done, what's being done with the money. But let me go into what's happening right now, right? It says, rather than parting ways with the Republican National Committee, remember that Trump, there were rumors that he was going to start this Patriot Party, that he was going to start his own political party. It seems now that he's going to stay with the Republican Party. It says here, rather than parting ways with the RNC, as some pundits had suggested, Trump has voiced his support for helping Republicans take back the House in the 2022 midterms. Now, Corey Ludanowski, who managed Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, has also said that Trump won't form a separate party, suggesting those stories were just rumors. And he continues, after there were reports of speculation that he might start his own Patriot Party again. Now, I'll skip past this a little bit and go deeper into it. Now, Trump's political team last week disavowed any affiliation with the newly formed political committee called the MAGA Patriot Party. Now, what does this all mean? By the way, tonight's drink is water. Going simple tonight. Yeah, Karen Rody, you're saying buying silver tomorrow. I'm sure many of you saw that these independent investors, after taking on GameStop and so on Monday, I guess a lot of people are going to start buying silver, which for anyone who owns silver currently is going to be quite the boon. All right, so let's go into what's happening with Trump now. Now, it doesn't actually talk much about what he's doing right now. We do know they raised $86 million online for efforts to investigate election integrity. That was in the last 37 days of 2020. Now, it does seem at the time, we don't see a whole lot going on with the Trump lawsuits or the Trump, the We the People lawsuits from Sidney Powell or from Lynn Wood. We haven't really heard much on these. There are independent investigations taking place in different parts of the U.S. In New York, for example, a House seat was actually just overturned because evidence was brought forward that the election was basically rigged, and a House seat was flipped from Democrat to Republican. Now, a bit ironic because, everyone's saying that this election fraud doesn't exist and so on. look, in Virginia, election fraud was found. The election fraud, essentially, the actions done were found to have been illegal. They deemed what happened in Virginia illegal. Now here in New York, well, not here, I'm in Texas, but in New York, they just deemed that the election fraud that took place for the House seat was to the extent that they actually overturned the seat. And so this is very much happening. Now, we actually haven't heard much when it comes to Trump in terms of what he's actually doing, right now. We do see evidence, for example, that he's meeting individually with some different U.S. leaders on the Republican side. We do hear a little bit about this, but really, it's not clear what he's doing. What's important with this, though, is that before all of this, before everything was overturned, essentially late December, Trump had raised again $86 million online. And the big question now is going to be, what is he going to do with this money? Is he going to continue the efforts to investigate the election, given that the money was raised, right? Given that that money was raised with the stated purpose of investigating election integrity. And if we see already in New York, for example, that evidence brought forward with the elections has in fact overturned the House seat. If we see, for example, that in Virginia, evidence brought forward showed that what was done there in the 2020 elections was deemed illegal. And if we see what's happening in Arizona as well, where they're doing two different types of audits, there's the Maricopa County audit, which has limited scope, and there's the local Senate audit, which is going to be more thorough. We do see these investigations continuing in different states, and we can assume that maybe because Trump did raise money based on that statement of investigating this, that's where the money's going to be going. Now, going back a little bit in terms of these donations, remember what happened with Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was, of course, part of the Trump team. He got involved with Mr. Guo Wengwei, with G Media. Oh, yeah. Some of you asking who's standing behind me. That's a mirror, actually. You can see, right? I have a mirror behind me. Remember what happened with Steve Bannon with, he was with Guo Wengwei, of course. He, has been doing the War Room Pandemic show, so on, right? Now, Bannon got involved with the Build the Wall fundraiser campaign. They built the wall. And he, of course, faced charges because allegedly they didn't use all the money in the way that was stated to be used, right? And Trump, of course, pardoned him and so on. I won't get into that. But what's important here is if this $86 million was raised with the stated intent that the money would be used to investigate the elections, presumably the money would have to be used for that, or potentially it's a crime if they don't. And so we would assume that as investigations continue in different parts of the U.S., that it's going to be financed by this, very likely, and that we could see things very similar to what happened in Virginia, either where the actions in 2020 are deemed illegal, or what happened just recently in New York, where a House seat was actually overturned and a Republican was given the House seat, since the Democrat House seat was deemed to have been gotten through ill-gotten means, essentially. Yeah, so interesting to watch going forward. As always, I'll keep you updated as we hear more on this. All right, let's see here. Next story up. This is an interesting one. This is Epoch Times, this is Associated Press through Epoch Times. It says Venezuela, right? Remember Venezuela and this whole election thing just happened? Venezuela hired Democratic Party donor for $6 million. It says here. It says Venezuela's socialist government previously hired a longtime Democratic Party donor for $6 million at the same time it was lobbying to discourage the U.S. from imposing sanctions on the oil-rich nation, newly filed lobbying records show. The documents, which were disclosed on January 28th, indicated that a U.S. subsidiary of Venezuela's state oil giant, PDVSA, agreed to hire Marcia Wiss's Washington law firm in March 2017. That's the same month that it signed a consulting deal for $50 million with scandal-tainted former Representative David Rivera. Now, Wiss, an international trade lawyer with a history of donations to the Democratic Party, including a $1,500 contribution to Joe Biden last year, denies that she had any lobbying work. Denies she did any lobbying work. Now, her former client, right, Her former client, now under new management, said it was aware of the full extent of her work toward determining if it constituted political activities benefiting Nicolas Maduro's government in Venezuela. The PDVSA subsidiary also took the unusual step of registering retroactively as a foreign agent, disclosing the contracts with Rivera, Wyss, and a third vendor, essentially showing some strange ties again with Democrat donors and other individuals with Venezuela. Of course, the country is suspected to have had some involvement with the U.S. election. Remember, specifically, not Venezuela per se, but DNI Ratcliffe had said that China, Russia, and Iran interfered with our elections. And of course, Venezuela was suspected to be a big part of that, right? Now, I'll go over a few more updates and we'll jump into some questions. Next here, this is an interesting one on some of the Republican backlash, the Democrats seemingly targeting Republicans in different ways. First off here, this is Epoch Times again. Florida town reviewing Trump's residency at Mar-a-Lago Resort. It says Palm Beach in Florida is reviewing whether it's legal for former President Donald Trump to reside at his Mar-a-Lago resort. There was never an issue with this before. Why are they doing it now, right? Now, town manager Kurt Blowen told news outlets that the town's attorney, John Randolph, is conducting a legal review. Mr. Randolph is receiving the Declaration of Use Agreement and our Code of Ordinances to determine if the former president can live at Mar-a-Lago. This is according to Blowen telling this to CNN. Now, they didn't answer emails on this, but the Trump organization said it's legal for Trump to live at Mar-a-Lago. Now, it's actually going to be interesting to see what happens with the press, because essentially the way the media worked for the last 5-ish years was based on scandals, Trump being the center of just about every scandal they went and carted around. Now that they essentially have no scapegoat, they don't have, the target of their 5 minutes of hate, essentially. What's going to happen in terms of these different attacks? Now, Trump has been relatively quiet. He's not doing a whole lot right now on the surface. We do see evidence and minor information showing that he is active behind the scenes, again, working on this new super PAC, Save America. Save America. And we see now that Trump is still being targeted in different ways, including by the local government in Palm Beach, Florida. Now, Trump changed his permanent residence from New York to Florida in 2019. And Trump had said this at the time. He said, quote, "I cherish New York and the people of New York and always will. But unfortunately, despite the fact that I pay millions of dollars in city, state, and local taxes each year, I have been treated very badly by the political leaders of both city and state. Few have been treated worse." Now, Trump left the White House in Washington on January 20th and flew to Palm Beach as his new successor, Joe Biden, was sworn in. Bit of background on that. Remember, Trump moved to Florida while basically New York State was talking about forcing him to reveal his tax documents. Trump said this, what's being done right now is essentially illegal. Trump left for Florida, changed his permanent residence to Florida rather than New York. And now, again, this wasn't an issue for the past 4 years. I don't think I've seen this issue with any wealthy individual. They're trying to argue that he should not be able to be living at his own resort in Mar-a-Lago. Now, I'll go over a couple more stories and I'll jump into the questions. Now, this is another one. Interesting because I think this again shows some of the double standard we have in the U.S. on law enforcement, specifically with the FBI. It says here, ex-Trump advisors lament light sentencing for FBI lawyer who falsified evidence. It says former President Donald Trump's advisors said Friday an ex-FBI lawyer who admitted to falsifying evidence in Crossfire Hurricane, avoiding jail time, was an example of a double standard of justice. And this is according to Corey Ludanowski telling Newsmax this. He says, quote, "If this was a Trump individual who had done this to the Obama administration or to the incoming Biden administration, this person would be in jail for the rest of their lives, and rightly so." Now, Kevin Kleinsmith, a former FBI lawyer, was sentenced to 1 year of probation, didn't even get a jail sentence, a $100 fine, and 400 hours of community service for changing an email. Now, Kleinsmith altered a message from the CIA to state that Trump aide Carter Page was not an asset for the agency, when the agency had said he was. The altered email was used to obtain spy warrants against Page. In other words, this individual falsified government information in order to feed a scandal against the sitting president of the United States during a time when different government officials are trying to get Trump out of office. Now, if this was, the chairs were switched and this was Biden, for example, they're talking right now about sedition charges for people who protested against the inauguration. They're talking about sedition charges. Imagine now if a Trump official had altered evidence, altered government documents, in other words, altering evidence that was then used in its altered form, right, to obtain a spy warrant against a Biden official and was then used to prosecute someone falsely based on that, and then was used as well to go after the sitting president. What would the charge be for someone like that, right? I would say at the very least, perjury, at the very least. At the very high end of this, you could say it was sedition, right? Trying to basically unseat a sitting president using underhanded means. And this individual got pretty much a slap on the wrist. No jail time, $100 fine, 400 hours of community service, and probation, really nothing. Now, Page was accused of being a spy for Russia. He was probed by federal agents and smeared in media outlets. Technically, I think Page could very likely even file, for example, defamation charges against these individuals if he wanted to. Now, officials later said the spying was improper and concluded Page was innocent. Now, this is according to Stephen Bannon, we mentioned just briefly ago, on War Room. He said, quote, "Ruined a guy's life, hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, can't get a job. This is the system at work," commenting what happened to this individual. Now, Kleinsmith told the court Friday that the email forgery was a, quote, critical error in judgment and an unnecessary shortcut. Now, what does he mean? That he made a critical error in judgment to essentially commit what would normally be considered perjury, altering government documents in order to effect a criminal prosecution and an investigation, right? And an unnecessary shortcut. An unnecessary shortcut to what? An unnecessary shortcut to a false prosecution? It's bizarre, right? Now, let's go deeper into this. Now, Carter Page had told the Epoch Times previously that Kleinsmith, this individual, quote, had an important position in this very serious process. GOP lawmakers also pan the light sentence. Now, Representative Brian Babin, a Republican from Texas, wrote this in a tweet. He said, "Are you kidding me? This man used his position in the FBI to forge evidence and abuse the FISA court in order to spy on the Trump campaign officials. He broke the law. Any other person would be sitting in prison." Chuck Grassley also said that this was very strange. He said he recommended that Kleinsmith receive jail time, and he said it's very rare. I won't go too deep into this, but I think this shows a pretty stark contrast with what's happening right now in the United States, where, again, individuals are being investigated for attending a protest. Even individuals who did not enter the Capitol building on January 6th are being investigated, like Brandon Straka. And many of them, other individuals, are even facing investigations for sedition. Meanwhile, an individual, again, who actually did commit a crime and is receiving a very light sentence for it, is really not really facing much. A few of you are asking, this is, yeah, that's me. You're asking why you can't tip Josh no more. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, YouTube has completely censored this channel in terms of financing. Crossroads and many other channels of Epoch Times are fully demonetized now by YouTube. And so we no longer have super chat function. We no longer have advertisements. If you folks do want to support this channel, you can go to donorbox.org/crossroads, and you can find the links to that in the descriptions as well. Now, folks, let me go over a few different questions here. Let's see. This is from Jad. He said, "Joshua, did you see the new PV Facebook leaks?" That's Project Veritas. I've been trying to keep up with it. I didn't see the latest about Facebook. I will look into it though. Project Veritas has been on a roll with some of the stuff lately. This is from I've been driving all day, so flying and then driving all day. This is from Les Flynn. He said, has anything been done yet? And why hasn't there been any arrests? Well, I think we're seeing now that under Trump, the FBI was essentially inactive. We saw many individuals involved in the Crossfire hurricane avoid prosecution, and we saw pretty serious double standards when it comes to the way crimes were handled. Just like in the story we just now discussed, an individual who knowingly altered information, it appears, used to again go after someone, right? Used to go after someone and really having no impact. Allowing an individual to be falsely prosecuted, falsely investigated, used again as fuel by the media to target the sitting president, and used again to basically drum up hatred across the country. Quite the bizarre circumstance, whereas individuals like, for example, Carter Page or Roger Stone, for example, were facing very serious charges, and Trump ended up pardoning, for example, Roger Stone. Other individuals in the Trump team had a lot of people going after him as well. We see a double standard. Now, meanwhile, individuals like James Comey, individuals like John Brennan, and other individuals who were involved in that scandal, and who really, in terms of documents were declassified, other information coming out, many of whom should be facing at the very least serious investigations, seem to be well on the road to getting off without anything. The only chance there is, I think, of prosecutions against those individuals now would be Durham, who is, of course, with the special counsel now and does have the abilities of a prosecutor. But we haven't seen Durham do anything. He had the chance even before the election, didn't do anything. I remember Durham was appointed by Barr to investigate Crossfire Hurricane. We never saw the report on it. He was given special prosecutor abilities. We never saw anything with it. Unless Durham does something with it, we're probably not going to see anything on it. But we are seeing now that the FBI appears to be very aggressive in its investigations and in its prosecutions, right? Targeting Trump team, Trump supporters. Let's see here now. This is Logan Brunwick. He said, what's up with Epoch Times' Wikipedia page? I haven't checked it lately, to be honest. Pretty much big media, big tech, they don't like us, put simply. I don't know. It's, how should I say? There's individuals who are very heavily ideologically aligned and who really don't take the time to look at evidence or look at information themselves and essentially repeat things and take things at face value. I know that they try to brand Epoch Times as being far right, which is ridiculous. Actually, an independent study of Epoch Times done by one of these media bias groups, they did a blind study. They said Epoch Times is centrist, right? Centrist to center right. Center right only because they said that we tend to interview more conservatives than we do Democrats. And so centrist in our reporting and only center right considered because we tend to interview more conservatives than Democrats. And so really people calling us far right, it's a bunch of nonsense. It's just name calling. All right, let's see here. Yeah, and you're asking, are they watching over this chat? Almost definitely. You get trolls and stuff. I mean, whatever, right? I think it's fine. It's good people, even if they don't agree with the content. It's good people from different sides of things are listening to other views. I think it's a good thing. All right, this is from Hollow. He said, no super chat, the channel banned. Yeah, again, Crossroads and several other channels of the Epoch Times have been fully demonetized by YouTube. And again, if you do want to support us, you can check out the links to Donor Box or to Patreon in the description below. This is from Sam Stamps. He said, hey, question. So what's up with the Freedom Day, February 1st, Trump signed? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I know a lot of people are assuming Trump might still do something. It's possible. I mean, again, he did start this PAC, right? He did start this PAC. Again, the Save America PAC. He has started this Office of the Former President. You still have Durham being a big question mark in terms of what he's doing. A lot could happen. There's been a lot of speculation that Trump may actually take action and do something. Right now, we don't see any evidence of things moving on that, other than maybe investigations into what happened in the 2020 elections, but we'll have to see. Trump did declare Freedom Day on February 1st, and who knows, maybe something will happen February 1st. Maybe he'll hold a big event. We'll have to see. It's all speculation at this point. This is from Erica Vargo. He said, "Dear Josh, we understand the Arizona State Senate is trying hard to conduct an audit of their own, a complete and comprehensive audit, which I believe could finally resolve many unanswered questions for the American people. How can we help Senator Karen Fann and her team accomplish this extraordinarily important task? We are all willing to accept the outcome. Either way, the data falls. But it must be done with integrity, without the possibility of bipartisan interference." So again, in Arizona, you have two different audits taking place of the elections. One audit, which is the one most people are talking about, is the one being done now in Maricopa County. The problem that's been raised about that audit is it's actually very narrow in scope. And so the actual scope of that audit would not encompass a lot of the things people are actually concerned about. And the concern with Maricopa County moving forward with an incomplete audit is that, pretty much the media would say an investigation proved there was no election fraud, move on. Anyone saying otherwise is spreading false information and we should ban you from the internet or something like that. And, the funny thing with these fact checkers and so on is they oftentimes get their facts wrong. I think hydroxychloroquine is a great example of this. How many people could have been saved who died of the virus? How many people could have been saved by hydroxychloroquine? And YouTube, other social media sites were forbidding people from talking about potential cures to the virus. Had I done a video about the possible health benefits of hydroxychloroquine, YouTube, at least in some of their videos, had stated that they could, block the channel or delete my videos. And how many people, again, had to die because they may have been able to be treated through hydroxychloroquine because that was not allowed to be stated, right? Now, hydroxychloroquine has since been approved, but this is only now afterwards. And it was again stated as essentially just a big conspiracy before this. A lot of the media were saying this, you couldn't question it. Again, bias of the fact checkers and bias of individuals trying to censor free speech, preventing things from being discussed that actually could have had a good benefit on society. It's pretty terrible. And now we see the same thing in Arizona, that media essentially are going to run on the Maricopa County audit, when the fact is that people in the local Senate there are raising the point that, again, right, the audit is too limited to actually encompass the real concerns. And so the local Senate there is going to do their own audit, and that will be the main audit, the findings of which could actually reveal something. To your question, you ask, how can you support them? I'd say send letters of support. I think that'd be a big thing on it. All right, let's see here. This is from Cultured Yobo. Yeah, good seeing you here. He said, "Josh, after reading the excellent book China Virus by the Canadian journalist Ezra Levant, I have a theory that the CCP virus entered the US from Canada. Note, Trudeau did not block PRC Chinese flights until March 2020, and as a love affair like his father Pierre with communist regimes in general. Your thoughts?" It is very possible. Remember that when Trump banned travel from China, right, he was called a racist and so on. Remember that Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats were partying in Chinatown and, playing on this whole racist narrative, saying Trump was racist for putting travel bans in place, right? Meanwhile, we kept travel open with some different countries, and some of those countries, such as Canada, kept travel open with China. It is possible that people entered the US from China through Canada as a proxy. That is possible. In terms of having evidence to show that, I don't think I could prove it, but it's possible. At the same time, of course, we see that Biden has, first of all, ended a lot of the travel bans and now reinstated a lot of the same travel bans that Trump had put into place. All right, so let's move on to some more stories for the night. One second. All right. right, let's see. Now, this is an interesting one. This is again from Epoch Times. Says nonprofit fundraiser sues Connecticut over burdensome and invasive regulations. And this is something I think we're going to be seeing more and more of over the next few years. It says here, a West Virginia-based nonprofit fundraiser has filed a civil rights lawsuit against Connecticut over that state's unusually burdensome rules that require him to tell state officials what he's planning to say to prospective donors a full 20 days in advance of donor contact. Now, the lawsuit, Kissel versus Siegel, was filed on January 31st in federal court in Connecticut. The plaintiff is Adam Kissel in Charleston, West Virginia. The defendant, Michael H. Siegel, is being sued in her official capacity as commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection. Now, it says here, Daniel N. Ornter, an attorney with the Sacramento-based Pacific Legal Foundation, a public interest law firm that is representing Kissel free of charge, said Connecticut is restricting the ability of people to go out and fundraise for money for charities. Now, while most states require a paid solicitor to register and some require the posting of bond, Connecticut goes far beyond what most states require, he told the Epoch Times in an interview. And he said this, quote, the First Amendment guarantees the right of free speech. The Supreme Court has made it very clear that fundraising is a form of protected speech. It is ultimately advocacy. Now, I won't go too deep into this, but I think we're going to see more and more of this. Now, for example, we see Texas threatening lawsuits against the Biden administration. We see Arizona talking about similar lawsuits. We see, for example, rumors that some of these oil worker unions talking about lawsuits, talking about actions as well, because the pipeline was shut down again. We're seeing now that individuals are concerned across the United States about potential violations of constitutional rights, including, for example, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. And we see now as well many other potential violations of the Constitution being done through political overreach. Now, this is going to be, I think, an important debate in the United States going forward, because as government tries to become, say, have a heavier hand in terms of how they govern, it is going to naturally impede on the natural rights we have in the United States and protected within the Constitution. And again, if it's protected by the Constitution, right? If it's protected by the Constitution, Americans can file lawsuits, including against the government in different states, to argue this in the court of law. And this is going to be, I think, a very interesting discussion as we go forward, because we'll have to see what happens with the Supreme Court. But local states and even local districts within states can have lawsuits, which very likely will have honest lawyers and honest judges who can look at these issues and judge them based on the Constitution. And I think this is going to be one of the big stopgaps of government overreach as we go forward. Now, let's move on to some more stories. Now, this is another story about January 6th now. It says 2 Proud Boy members charged with conspiracy and Capitol riot. It says here, 2 members of the Proud Boys group were indicted Friday on a number of charges in connection with the January 6th Capitol riot, including conspiracy to obstruct law enforcement, the Department of Justice said. These individuals, Dominic Pizzola, 43 of Rochester, New York, and William Pepe, 31 of Beacon, New York, were indicted in federal court in the District of Columbia on charges that include civil disorder, unlawfully entering restricted buildings or grounds, and the disorderly and disruptive conduct, the Justice Department said in a statement. Pizzola also faces charges of robbery of personal property of the United States, assaulting, resisting, or impeding certain officers, destruction of government property, and engaging in physical violence in restricted buildings or grounds, prosecutors said. Pepe and Pizzola were originally charged by criminal complaint and arrest on January 12th and 15th, respectively, according to the Department of Justice. Now, according to the charging documents, Pizzola and Pepe are members of the Proud Boys, which the Justice Department notes described itself as a, quote, pro-Western fraternal organization for men who refuse to apologize for creating the modern world, aka Western chauvinists. Prosecutors said that on January 6th, Pizzola confronted a Capitol police officer trying to control the crowd and, quote, ripped away the officer's riot shield, which he is alleged to have later used to smash a window at the Capitol. Now, again, we'll see what happens with this. I think what a lot of people are looking at, though, is the double standards, again, with the Republicans rioting at the Capitol building and Democrats rioting with the Antifa and BLM riots that swept across the country. You saw individuals get arrested when it came to the BLM protests across the country. You saw individuals take over an entire, several blocks in Seattle with their Chaz site. You saw individuals take over police department in the Chaz site in Seattle. You saw individuals illegally handing out firearms to people, and you had several individuals killed. Now, of course, I think it's great if we have law. I think it's good we have law enforcement. If people did commit crimes, good. Let them face charges. Let the court decide what happens. But the problem the country's going to have is if the law is politically biased. If only people of one political standing are being investigated and people on the other side are not being investigated. What happened to the warlord of Chaz, right? What happened, for example, with the mass rioting, burning, and looting across the United States? What happened, for example, with these investigations into individuals who committed acts of murder, including of police officers, over the past few years with those riots? We've heard very little about them. Not only that, but we saw public officials, Hollywood actors, other individuals, even raising funds and bailing these people out of prison. We saw people getting off with a slap on the wrist, if even that, and pretty much a rotating door, essentially, right? Pretty much with a rotating door of going into jail and getting let right out because of the local prosecutors and district attorneys. Now, this is one of the big issues going forward is, okay, fine, investigate people. If you see crimes, let them face charges, let them go to court, let them argue their cases, and let a court of law decide. But will you hold the same standards of law for all people who violated the same types of laws? Will you, again, right, maintain the blindfold that Lady Justice is supposed to wear? Will Lady Justice continue wearing her blindfold, or is justice now being used based only on political alignment? And if, again, justice is being only administered to people of one particular political alignment that goes against the interests of the people in power, then I would say the country's at serious risk of, one, further divisions, which I think is terrible, and two, of pretty much a folding of the integrity of law enforcement in this country, which I think is also terrible. We'll have to see what happens. We've seen the FBI pretty much do nothing, right, when it came to investigating Crossfire Hurricane and other scandals during the Trump administration. And we see them now acting very quickly and very aggressively within the first couple of weeks of Biden. It does seem to be there is a very, very strong double standard with our justice system. And I think the Biden administration needs to demonstrate, right? They need to demonstrate that law goes both ways, right? And we'll see what happens. As I mentioned before, it is possible the Biden administration may actually target Antifa and BLM, especially because they're actually turning now against Biden. Antifa, for example, is now protesting against Democrats. It is possible they could go after them, and it'll be interesting to watch how that unfolds. Because, again, with any kind of government takeover, right, with any kind of socialist movement, you want to have, during the revolution, quote unquote, you want to have your forces who are used to agitate, to make people uncomfortable, as they've said, to go out and basically undermine and overthrow the system. But after you have achieved your political goals, aka your party has a supermajority and your party controls the whole of the government, you no longer need disorder. You no longer need protests. What you need at that point is a time to heal, right? You no longer need riots on the street, no longer need burning. And in fact, very likely they'll crack down very hard on that. After that is said and done with, they no longer need those individuals. That's why, one of the ironies of this is Lenin's, I think, called them useful idiots. People who are used to overthrow a system, but once the thing they install is the new way of doing things, basically, they do away with them in one way or the other. An example of this, for example, was Mao Zedong with the Red Guards. And a lot of people have compared Antifa to the Red Guards. Remember what happened with them? These were essentially, young communists who were used to attack people and carry out all the disruptive actions of Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution in China, killing priests, killing landlords, burning down buildings, destroying temples, destroying cultural relics, and so on. Once Mao Zedong had pretty much full control over the society, he no longer needed the Red Guard. And so what does he do with them? He starts this program and he says, okay, we're going to start these farm programs out in the middle of nowhere. And so, all you Red Guards, go and show your true patriotism and go and become, feudal peasants so we never have to look at you again. He shipped them all to the countryside. You see the same thing with all these communist regimes, Yeah. All right, let's go a bit deeper into this. I'll go over a couple more news stories, and then we'll jump into some questions again. Now, this is Epoch Times again. It says, judge orders Trump organization to give documents to New York Attorney General. It says here, a judge in New York on Friday ordered the Trump organization to give documents to an attorney general. Supreme Court Judge Arthur Engoron said lawyers representing the company must turn over documents it sought to withhold. And he wrote this in the order, quote, Morgan Lewis is hereby ordered to produce a petition by February 4th, 2021. All documents marked non-privileged by this court in the privilege log being emailed today under separate cover to all parties. Now, the firm must give the documents to New York Attorney General Letitia James, a Democrat who is probing whether the Trump organization improperly manipulated the value of former President Donald Trump's assets on annual financial statements in order to secure loans and obtain tax benefits. Now, Morgan Lewis marked communications as privileged, but the court found many documents were, quote, addressing business tasks and decisions, not exchanges, soliciting, or rendering legal advice. Now, any communications within Morgan Lewis speaking to public relations are of a business, not legal nature, according to the judge. Two firms representing the Trump organization in the case, including Morgan Lewis, did not respond for request to comment. The judge last month ordered the Trump organization to produce documents relating to communications between it and Ralph Mastronomico. I'm probably saying that wrong. An engineer it employed. The judge initially ruled that the documents were privileged, which is important there, but at James's behest, reviewed that distinction and reversed his decision. Now, I won't go too deep into this, but again, it essentially means ongoing investigations into Trump. Now, from the get-go, they were trying to get his tax documents. That was part of the reason why, under the calls for this, that he decided to move to Florida. They're now going after him and his potential, the legality of his residency in Florida, something that was never an issue before. You see them targeting Trump in every way. Now, why would they do this if they really want healing and peace and harmony, and they really want to coming together? Well, maybe it's because they still fear Trump. Maybe it's because they're afraid of what Trump may still be doing. Maybe it's because, again, as Trump has publicly stated, he plans, allegedly, based on what's coming out, he plans to help through elections and through grassroots organizing to essentially overturn the House and Senate, to win that back for the Republicans. And something that could happen. Remember when Trump first came into office, Republicans actually did have a supermajority. But because you had a lot of Republicans who did support Trump, people called them rhinos, right? Republicans in name only. They essentially didn't do anything. At the very least, a lot of them did not support Trump. And so a lot of what Trump was trying to do was being blocked by different individuals. All right. Let me do one more story here, then we'll move on to some other stuff. So this is, again, Epoch Times. Says media company files antitrust lawsuit against Facebook and Google. And this is going to be interesting as well. Remember what I was saying. Going forward, I think we're going to see a lot of lawsuits going against companies that are violating the Constitution or violating the law, and against government officials violating the Constitution or violating the law. Because what we're seeing in the U.S. right now is that big tech, big media, and big government are pretty much throwing out, again, rule of law. They are censoring. They are going after people based on political beliefs, targeting them with what appears to be a political bias, right? Double standards at the very least. They're censoring people, they're deplatforming people, they're destroying private businesses, they're destroying the lives of individuals. They're really, in many cases, committing serious defamation, and they're censoring information, such as the news on hydroxychloroquine, which has now been cleared finally. Censoring news on hydroxychloroquine, for example, that probably could have saved a lot of lives had they not censored it. Really, these people should be charged with manslaughter for the censoring they've done. It's ridiculous. Let's go into this a bit. Now, a West Virginia media company that operates several newspapers is suing Google and Facebook for threatening the extinction of local newspapers across the country by their alleged anti-competitive business practices. HD Media on January 29th filed a lawsuit asking a federal court to determine whether the two Silicon Valley companies had violated antitrust laws. The lawsuit claims Google has unlawfully exercised monopoly power of the digital advertising market, which has prevented newspapers from competing in the market and losing their primary source of revenue. It also claims that Google and Facebook had, quote, unlawfully conspired to engage in anti-competitive conduct through an alleged secret deal named, quote, Jedi Blue. Details of the alleged agreement were first revealed when 10 state attorneys generals sued Google for multiple violations of federal aid and state antitrust and consumer protection laws. Now, according to a redacted version of that lawsuit filed in December, Facebook announced in 2017, right? Facebook announced this in 2017, that it would try a new method of selling online advertising called, quote, header bidding, which would act as the threat of competition for Google. The lawsuit suggested Facebook eventually, quote, curtailed its involvement with the project after Google gave Facebook, quote, information, speed, and other advantages in the redacted auctions that Google runs for publishers mobile app advertising inventory each month in the United States. Now, the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, which both say they reviewed an unredacted version of the complaint, reported the alleged secret deal referred in the lawsuit was codenamed Jedi Blue by Google. Now, HD Media's lawsuit claims that as a result of Google and Facebook alleged anti-competitive and monopolistic activities, newspapers in West Virginia and across the country are facing, quote, a very real existential threat to their existence. And it says, without redress, these newspapers and hence the citizens of West Virginia may well end up in the news desert. Now, this is going to be an interesting discussion again, right? Because as I've been saying, really under Trump, you had the attempt to change the United States and fight back against really what were a lot of big government policies from the top down. And I think a lot of conservatives especially were looking to Trump to basically play that role. We now see the whole thing having been inverted. And we see now the push to protect rights and individual freedoms and fight back against big government, big tech, and big media happening from the bottom up, whereas the powers at the top now are kind of pushing back against that. Right? The whole dichotomy flipped upside down, essentially. What is going to be interesting now, as I mentioned, is when individuals, businesses, public officials, and public figures start filing lawsuits against big government, big tech, and big media based, again, on things that they are doing that may be illegal. And Facebook, Google, a lot of these big companies are actually under a lot of fire right now. Again, Europe and a lot of European countries, they are pushing for regulations on this. I mentioned in the last episode that may not be a good thing in terms of internet freedom, right? Because again, if they put international regulations in place essentially for, what can be censored on the internet, then you're also creating standards through which freedom of speech can be, prosecuted, or freedom of speech can be censored based on an international regulation, which I think can be pretty dangerous for the future of the internet. If not immediately, because immediately maybe the standards won't be too tight. Then long term, because all it takes is a few officials essentially getting together one day, especially if it's an international body like in Europe, and they decide that a new stipulation should be added to it. Like, for example, you can't criticize government policies or something. I mean, just as an example. The way that could be altered would be the concern. But as I mentioned, you do see this pushback against big tech happening in Europe. You also see the UK right now going against these big media companies, big social media companies, because they're addressing the algorithms that the systems are based upon are manipulating people, which they do by their very nature. And you also see Australia pushing back against companies like Google, because they're arguing that Google, for example, is able to basically be the monopoly for the news industry, has a monopoly for the news industry, and doesn't really give money to news outlets whose content it uses, right? You're going to be seeing this more and more. You're going to be seeing more and more this grassroots pushback, not just in the United States, but around the world on these large institutions, whether it be government overstepping the realms of, overstepping the boundaries of what government should be doing, whether it be big business overstepping constitutional boundaries, or whether it be big media committing libel, censoring people, and so on. I think we're going to see a lot of this going forward, actually. Let's see here now. I'll go over a few questions. This is from Robin M. You say, hey, Josh, what are your thoughts on Biden losing 20 million doses of the vaccine? I did see that. So actually, the Biden campaign, Biden administration policies on the vaccines and on the virus really aren't doing so hot. Now, remember that during the presidential debates, Biden was accusing one of the main arguments he had against Trump was trying to accuse Trump of Americans dying from the virus. And he was saying Trump doesn't have a plan. And the media took this and they ran with it. And he was accused, remember they accused Trump of having conspiracy theories about cures to the virus. And some of these now we've seen get overturned. And it turns out that some of the treatment cocktails they criticized actually may work, and they've been encouraged now. We saw, for example, that Biden was saying Trump didn't have a plan. People were dying. We needed a relief bill. That relief bill went through pretty much toothless, doesn't even really barely benefits the American people, did a whole lot more for other countries, right? And now we're seeing that Biden, having come in, actually doesn't seem to have a plan either, which is quite bizarre. We see Biden now come in, right? Biden now come in. People have been accusing him based on his actual plan with the virus of pretty much plagiarizing it from Trump. He's pretty much just using Trump's plan for the virus. And of course, they already had the vaccine rollout. What was it? 1 million doses a week or something like that, or a day, which they were already reaching under Trump. And then Biden came out and, even the media were kind of giving him some trouble on it, saying, shouldn't you push up the numbers? And he's like, literally he was like, oh, hey, come on, man, give me a break, right? This is where it's at. And now it comes out again that he lost or is not able to find 20 million doses of the vaccine. Now, can we hold him accountable for 20 million doses of the vaccine being misplaced? I don't know how you misplaced 20 million doses. It's arguable, right? Now, it's unclear where it got lost. Maybe it was a private business lost it. Can the president be held accountable for a private business mishandling, for example, a product? It's arguable, right? But it does look bad. At the very least, we can say it does look bad. And again, we see after Biden gets in that standards are being loosened in terms of diagnosis. WHO has loosened its standards on diagnosing the virus, meaning that we're probably going to see less false positives, quote unquote, on the virus, meaning that, because of the way they've altered the standards of diagnosis, cases may actually go down. And so they might use that to say, look, see, we fixed it. You're seeing different states opening up, reopening. New York's going to reopen some indoor dining. 25%. In fact, a lot of restaurants in New York are saying, look, this is still going to kill us because it's only 25%. Detroit reopening some indoor dining, trying to get people back to school, even though the teacher unions are pushing back against it. Ironically, at a time when technically, if they were actually concerned about the virus before, you now have two different variants, the South Africa variant and the UK variant now appearing in the US, and virus cases are actually on the upswing. If they actually were concerned about the virus, technically they would be going the opposite way. They'd be doing more lockdowns, not less. So why are they choosing to make these changes now that Biden is president, right? It's a big question. Again, we'll have to see how things go moving forward. Let's see. This is from Molly Hante. He said, Joshua, are you in Austin, Texas? I'm currently in San Antonio, Texas. Just got here actually just a little bit before I started the broadcast tonight. I'm going to be in a few different parts of Texas, though, over the next several days. And I'll be keeping you all updated on some of that. Yeah. You said, I guess yes, because the high humidity there is making your curls more pronounced. Yeah. My hair, I have little control over it. Yeah. Let's see here. This is from Joanne Lockwood. He said, has Mr. Trump's lawyer left him? I did see some rumors on that. I want to confirm it before I make any statements, because sometimes you see media make claims and then the Trump administration, well, the Trump team now, I guess, coming out, oftentimes comes out and says, no, the whole thing was fake news. We disavow these stories. They're false and so on. And so sometimes just because the media is saying something happened doesn't always mean it has happened, unfortunately. And so I'd have to look into it. I'll keep you all updated. This is from Bridget Williamson. You said, is there any truth to Italy being involved in our election? There were sworn affidavits on that. There is evidence of it, based on sworn affidavits. There was a very strange military contract given to the Italian military contractor from these to Italy that was accused of having been involved with that, which is very curious. And a lot of people are alleging that maybe that was a payment to them. In terms of, could we prove it? In terms of where are things at? No. Really, this needs to be investigated. Trials need to play out, and it doesn't seem like that's going to happen currently. But again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the Trump administration having raised tens of millions of dollars, again, Trump, and under the pretext of using that money to do these investigations, we can assume that these investigations will continue. And as again we saw in Virginia, where the actions in the election were deemed illegal. That was a victory there technically for Trump. We saw, for example, in New York, where a House seat was flipped from Democrat to Republican because it was deemed to have been done. The Democrat was deemed to have won the seat through illicit means. And we see now again in Arizona where the local Senate investigations and audit are going to move forward. We do see that there are actions across the country to investigate, and actually through their investigations have a very strong chance, in fact, of even overturning House seats and maybe even Senate seats. Again, like we just saw happen in New York. And so, yes, there is evidence on the Italy thing. If you consider, again, a sworn affidavit evidence, which, yes, it legally is evidence. So, yes. Could we say without a doubt that has happened, that something wrong happened? No, you could not unless it went to trial and unless there was a real investigation. And we can only assume now that these investigations are, at least in some places, going to be happening. But again, it's grassroots. I really doubt the Biden administration is going to investigate this. Let's see, this is from Vanessa Ann. You said, what is your word for us as ordinary citizens to resist the socialist movement? I'd say, first off, do not be silent. Second off, do not lose faith, because I would say one of the biggest things that actual socialist movements try to do is make you lose your faith and lose your culture. These are the two biggest targets they have for their long-term goals, right? Destroy faith, destroy values, and destroy culture. And remember what happened with Lenin, right? Vladimir Lenin after the Bolshevik Revolution. They had a famine. And do you know what Lenin said during that time? This is according to the Black Book of Communism. Lenin said, right, after the Bolshevik Revolution and Russia was undergoing a famine that was killing millions of people, he was told about this, and what does he say, right? Lenin says, good. He says, because it will destroy not only their faith in the Tsar, but in God too. Lenin thought that millions of his people dying was good for the socialist cause. He said that as well. He said it will also help us move more rapidly from the state of capitalism to the state of socialism. Lenin thought the famine, millions of people dying, was a good thing because it would advance the country more rapidly towards socialism under the pretext of it destroying people's faith in their government, in the Tsar, and in God, in their faith. And so when any communist country, oftentimes their main target in terms of persecution is religious people, because their main goal is to destroy traditions, religion, values, all previously existing institutions, right? And so if you want to resist socialist subversion and socialist movements, do not lose your faith and do not sacrifice your values, and especially do not abandon your culture. I think, and especially don't stop talking about them. You know, this is what they're trying to destroy. Let's see here. This is from, so many of you are asking about the story in Myanmar. Let me go over what's happened in Myanmar. Let me talk about this real quick. So there's been a lot of you asking about it. This is actually interesting. I'll show you an article from AP real quick. Basically, the military in Myanmar is taking control of the country. There's been a military coup in Myanmar. Let's go into this. It says, Myanmar military television said Monday that the military was taking control of the country for 1 year, while reports said many of the country's senior politicians, including Aung San Suu Kyi, had been detained, the head of the country. A presenter on military-owned Myawaddy TV announced the takeover and cited a section of the military-drafted constitution that allows the military, that gave themselves the right, that allows the military to take control in times of national emergency. He said the reason for takeover was in part due to the government's failure to act on the military's claims of voter fraud in last November's elections and its failure to postpone the election because of the coronavirus crisis. It's interesting, right? Now, the announcement follows days of concern about the threat of a military coup and military denials that it would stage one, and came on the morning of the country's new parliament session, the morning the country's new parliament session was to begin. The takeover is a sharp reversal in the partial yet significant progress towards democracy. This is AP saying this. Hear me out. They say it's a reversal in the part of the significant progress towards democracy Myanmar made in recent years, following 5 decades of military rule and international isolation that began in 1962. It would also be a shocking fall from power for Suu Kyi, who led the democracy struggle despite years under house arrest and won a Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts. Now, again, the values of that are debatable. If you talk about, for example, the Burmese Myanmar government, right? I'd say it's debatable, but it's interesting. I think a lot of people are paying attention to this because the military launched a coup and say they're going to control the country for 1 year because, again, right? Because, again, they're saying that the election was a fraud in Myanmar and Burma, formerly known as Burma, and based on the fact that that a voter fraud allegedly took place and there were not investigations into it, that the military is taking control. And interesting as well, because they had been stating otherwise. They've been stating they will not do it. You know, we're not going to launch a coup. We're not going to take over. Sure enough, they do it. And interestingly, I think it was, in November this took place, meaning that they've done this now after the new administration was in. Now, a lot of people are looking at this, for example, because there were a lot of people in the U.S., such as General Michael Flynn, who were saying the military in the U.S. should have done the same thing, right? Basically, Flynn was pushing for the military in the U.S. to establish partial martial law and basically redo the elections. And some people were saying we need to have, for example, military courts trying this because we've seen how partisan the civilian courts are. This is, of course, why people are regarding this as a big deal and why an issue taking place in Myanmar is having such a big issue, a big impact on the narratives here in the U.S. It is very significant, I think, actually. All right, folks, it's getting quite late, so I'm going to call it a night. Again, I'll be doing these lives again every weeknight, not on Saturdays, but Sunday through Friday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, with the one exception of if I can't get to an internet connection in time because I am on the road, but that shouldn't be an issue. So count on us being here again tomorrow night, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. Now, that said, folks, again, we've been demonetized fully by YouTube. We can challenge it next month. I'll keep you updated on that. We'll see if anything happens with it. We're looking at some other options. I'll keep you all updated. In the meantime, if you do want to support Crossroads, go to our Patreon page or our donor box page, both of which you can find linked in the description below. And as always, folks, appreciate all of you. Always enjoy talking with all of you. Yeah, thank you. M49, thank you. EFO, thank you. Yeah, Matt Swift, appreciate it. All of you, yeah, really appreciate the support as always. As always as well, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. This has been quite the week, not just for our nation, but for the show as well. Now, as I mentioned in a recent episode, we found out the same day as the inauguration that YouTube has completely demonetized us. Now, honestly, it was expected, given the current environment of censorship, but it's also quite the blow to us financially, at least for the time being. It's a difficult time for not just us, but for the nation as a whole. In Washington, 6 in the morning, the sky was still dark. News reports said that the National Guard would be leaving, but even by noon, we still saw them stationed on the streets. And I wondered whether this really will be the new norm for the United States, and whether the nation has reached a stage where every national event going forward will have security like this. Now, it's not just the past few days that have been hard for the country, but the last year especially. We've seen panic around the CCP virus, job losses, an economic nosedive that hit small businesses the hardest. And on top of this, we've seen riots sweep across the country that pitted citizens against the police. We've witnessed a political climate where the people of this country are being held to two different sets of laws. And we saw a difficult election where many serious questions were left unanswered. People are losing faith in the integrity of our systems of justice, in our systems of government, and even in our fellow countrymen. Now, I was reflecting on all this as I walked through Washington. It's been hard for me to watch this country, which I love so much, facing so much turmoil and division. And it's difficult to watch our rights of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and freedom of belief being targeted for attacks. It's hard to watch big businesses and the big corporate media working hand in hand with big government in these attacks. Now, it was while I was thinking about this that a man recognized me on the streets. He greeted me and thanked me for doing the show. I've always enjoyed meeting you all, but it was especially so this time. It reminded me how important independent media is during chaotic times like these. Now, I've always held that truth has the natural power to dispel lies, so it's natural that those who lie have it in their interest to prevent truth from being spoken. It takes courage in times like these to stand up, as it takes a willingness to face criticism and attacks. But I also understand that taking up this mantle during this time is what myself and others are being asked to do, and I'll do everything I can to not let you down, and to do so calmly and with good reason. Now, I'm a big believer in finding opportunities in adversity. When one door closes, another opens, and I have faith that for those who stand with integrity, goodness will always prevail. The Epoch Times has been publishing for over 20 years, despite the Chinese Communist Party's best efforts to shut us down. They've gone after our funding sources, they've hacked our website, they've set our printers on fire, they've threatened our staff, and used every means they could to discredit us. And despite the world's second largest economy bearing down on us, we've never stopped publishing, and we never plan to do so. Now, you may be wondering how we've managed to survive all these years. Now, put simply, we've managed to survive because of you, because of loyal viewers and readers who support independent media. So thank you, genuinely. We couldn't have done it without you. And with that said, given that YouTube has demonetized us, if you want to support us, please consider donating to us on DonorBox, which you can find linked in the description below. And going forward, I plan to continue presenting an accurate picture of the news, including here in the United States. I also plan to continue my work exposing the subversive programs of the Chinese Communist Party, which I think will only become more serious. And I plan also to help expose the forms that socialism is now taking in this country and around the world, while also helping to keep alive the values and traditions that are now under assault. That said, folks, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your support. And while it's possible we may move to another platform, these current attacks will not stop us from speaking the truth. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.